Gurur Brahma, Gurur Vishnu, Gurur Devo Maheshwaraha, Gurureva Param Brahma, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Chinmayam Vyapyat Sarvam Trailokyam Sacharacharam Tadpadam Darshitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Tvameva Mata cha Pita Tvameva Bandhuscha Sakha Tvameva Vedya Dravidam Tvameva Sarvam Mamadeva Deva Tvameva Sarvam Mamadeva Deva. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahana Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So this morning we start a new text, Aparokshanubhuti. Scott, do you have a copy of it by any chance?
And there was not an email that said what to get either, so I'm not sure what to get.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
There wasn't any email, so I don't know what the name of the book is even.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Let me get a copy of it. My fault. So this is it, Aparokshanubhuti. You see it? All right, it's Adi Shankara, and we're doing the translation by Swami Chinmayananda. So this is a text by Adi Shankara. So Shankara's works are divided roughly into three categories. The most famous, of course, are the Bhashya. Bhashya are commentaries, which are very dense, logical, philosophical treatises, where he goes through every word of a text and analyzes it. He did a very famous Bhashya on the Bhagavad Gita, the Brahma Sutras, and Bhashya on all of the principal Upanishads. In fact, we call them the principal Upanishads because Shankara commented on them. There are important ones that he did not comment on, like the Kaivalya. He didn't do that one. And there are two that he commented on, which Swamiji never taught, largely because of their size, the Chandogya and the Brihadaranyaka. So Bhashya, first category. Another are the hymns, the stotram. And actually about 3/4 of everything that's attributed to Shankara are devotional hymns. So a lot of people go, oh, we're jnana yogis, we Shankara people, we don't do all that emotional stuff. You don't know Shankara. So we have wonderful things like Bhaja Govindam is in that category. Nirvana Shatakam, one of my very favorites. Brahma Jnana Valli, These are very, very wonderful, wonderful hymns. Devotion to the deity and non-dualism itself. Then the third category are what we call the prakarana texts or prakriya texts. Both words are used. Literally, that means a list of categories. But what he's done in these texts, which is brilliant, he's taken the ideas largely from the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita. Occasionally, you might see some of the ideas that we find in Yoga Vasishta, whether he had direct contact with that text or both drew on an earlier text, I'm not sure. But what he did is arrange them in a pedagogical order of study. So you start with the most basic understanding and experience, and he gives us practices to do and ideas to work with to take us to the highest. So that's the value of this third category of texts. There are works that some of us may have studied. If you study Tattva Bodh, Atma Bodha, Viveka Chudamani, Drishya Vivek, and of course, this one of the most famous, Aparokshanubhuti. So these are all the prakarana texts, and this is one of the most famous. Now, did Shankara write it? I don't know. He was supposedly only lived 32 years, traveled all over India, founding these great mutts, these great seminaries, restoring temples, arguing with all sorts of people. And there's no way one person could have written everything that's attributed to him in 32 years. Mm-hmm. So, and we usually date him 788 to 820. So either he lived longer, or what is most likely, he had a school of students. Much like in the Renaissance, I have a friend who's visiting Washington, D.C., and I said, oh, you've got to go see the Botticelli Portrait of Youth. Well, Botticelli had a studio. So there are many Botticelli works. Well, did Botticelli himself do this, or did the students in his studio do it? Making sense? So many people think that some of these works were actually written maybe under his guidance, but certainly not by him. Doesn't matter. It's good stuff. Any thoughts or questions about this? All right, let's dive into the text. Scott, I promised to send you the link to that as soon as class is over. So obviously, don't let me forget before.
And I'll post it on WhatsApp.
Great, great.
Would you like me to read the introduction?
I think, oh, sure. I think
It's
I
pretty
probably covered everything
Yeah.
I just said, but
Yeah. It's about the same.
all right, let's go into the text.
Okay. Sri Shankaracharya Krit Aparokshanubhuti.
Oh, we should
Is
go
this-
into what the name means. Forgot that. So paroksha is something that you see at a distance. Aparoksha is something that's really immediate. So what the title means is the immediate, direct experience of your essential nature. That's what the meaning of the text is. All right.
And this is in verse, right?
Yes.
They're not so good.
Shloka is what I should have.
Shri Harim Paramananda Upadeshashtaramishram Vyapakam Sarvalokanam Karanam Tam Namamyaham. I bow down in prostration to that Sri Hari, the world preceptor, the Lord of the universe, the all-pervading, the cause of the whole universe, and the supreme blissful reality.
Yes. So one of the nice things about Adi Shankara is he adores and addresses divinity in all its various popular forms. So he, in Nirvana Shatakam, Shivoham, Shivoham. Here he addresses Hari, which is another name for Lord Vishnu. See. So here he bows down to that Hari, Vishnu, Krishna. And here we don't mean the external form. We mean the consciousness, which is the substratum of the whole creation, out of which everything. Now, we've talked about this before. A tradition in these works is the highest knowledge is put forward first. So here he's saying what he bows down to, what he adores, what he reveres, what he worships. It's the ground of being of the whole world. Beyond next one.
Aparokshanubhutirve Prochate Moksha Siddhe Sabdhireva Prayatnena Vikshaniya Muhurmuha. This intimate experience of reality, Aparokshanubhuti, is expounded herein for the attainment of liberation only, and it is worthy of being carefully looked into again and again by the good people.
Muhur muhu, again and again. So the intimation here is we don't just go through this one sick, I've got it. And speed reading enlightenment. And as he does with many texts, he identifies what the text is and for whom is it written. Now, I was talking with a student a couple months ago, and she's been away with her family and stuff like that. And their family has an astrologer who kind of acts as their guru. And so I asked her, well, is she meditating? She says, well, kind of, yes. And she says this guru gave her a mantra, and it's a mantra for prosperity. And a mantra to get a husband. No problem. In the Vedas, the entire range of human experience is addressed. If you want wealth, there is study and mantras for that. If you want love in your life, there's that. Success in career, healing disease, all of that is addressed in the Veda. vast corpus of knowledge. Also, at the end of each section or portion of the Vedas, in the Veda Anta, the end of the Vedas, there are sections which concern liberation. Those sections of the Vedas are called the Upanishads. So here Shankara is saying, this is not a prosperity text. This is not how to have love spells. This is a text for those who desire liberation. Now, what are the preconditions for having mumukshutva, the burning desire for liberation? First of all, you have to have a knowledge of the world outside. You have to have lived in the world enough to know what it can give, what it can't. I had a friend of mine who's a Buddhist who gave me a wonderful definition of dukkha. We usually translate it as suffering. But this Buddhist teacher shared with him that it is the attempt to find enduring satisfaction in the material world. Not a wonderful definition. That's what we do. My mind keeps going to the stuff we were talking about before class. That's dukkha, that's suffering. So we have to be kicked in the teeth enough, slapped by the world enough to be very clear what it could give, and certainly what it can give. We also have to have done enough introspection to have a knowledge of our own interior states, our own kleshas, our own afflictions, our own doshas, defects. You got issues. What are your issues? Many, many ways in which to begin to discover that. One of the most famous sayings of Socrates, the unexamined life is not worth living. So you need to have an awareness of the world outside and an understanding of your own interior world, so that we don't come to the spiritual life with romanticism and naivete. They made a movie of Swamiji's life called On a Quest. And in it, one section, he goes up to Rishikesh and meets Shivananda. And Swamiji was a Marxist and an atheist. And as Marx said, religion is the opium of the populace. So he goes to Shivananda and said, all this nonsense, the worshiping of the gods and the pujas and the pilgrimages and all that sort of stuff. It's superstition. You know what Shivananda said? You're right. There is something that's real. So we have to be able to move through the romanticism and the superstition. Find out what's real. I want the truth. So this is the kind of mind that the mumukshu needs. One who's desirous of liberation. We have to examine ourselves because many of us begin the spiritual path thinking that God is just the biggest band-aid. I'm not having the love affairs I want in life. I'm not making enough money and I don't like my job. Maybe God can fix all that. No problem. And then when God does it, this religion stuff doesn't work. And the Hebrew prophets tell it like it is. I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God. Thou shalt not have any other gods before me. Exoteric understanding of that is for the Israelites, don't worship Baal, don't worship Mo, worship Yahweh. Doesn't mean that. It means you won't really get the fruits of the spiritual life until we want God alone. Any thoughts on this before we move on?
But if one doesn't have the experience of God, one has to follow any path that one thinks that can lead to it.
The path, you have to have faith in the path that leads to it. That's correct. But what I'm saying is, if, on the other hand, you get sidetracked. So, for example, in ancient Israel, Baal was a nature god. You wouldn't worship Baal to make sure your crops grew. What did you want? I want crops. Mot or Mot, I can't remember how it's pronounced, M-O-T. He was the sea god. You worshiped him so your ships didn't sink. But that's a metaphor. Are you going to pray to the Blessed Virgin Mary so that your marriage is good? Are you going to, do you get the idea? The idea is, and it takes time. And, yoga would say lifetimes to develop that mumukshutva, that purity, that sub-age, that auspicious wish, that auspicious desire. All right, next verse.
Svavarnashram dharmena tapasa haritoshanat sadhanam prabhavet punsam vairagyadi cha tushtayam. By constant performance of one's own duties, and by austerities, and by devotion to Lord Hari, a person can gain the necessary 4 qualifications, such as dispassion and so on.
So, in Vivekachudamani, Shankara says, success in spiritual attainment is entirely due to the degree of the qualifications of a fit student. Other factors such as time and place, and I would even say the guru, while important, fundamentally secondary. So many people, I was having a conversation with a friend back in DC, and he says he's very keen on the Yoga Sutras. He says, well, because the Vedanta doesn't give you any process, it's just philosophy, you know. I love what he said. If you think you're your body, saying Jagat Mithya is stupid. How could you say the universe is unreal when you think love is very real?
Mm-hmm.
Good point. Good point. But I push back on that. We do have a process in the Vedanta. What's our process? If we cannot apprehend the highest truth as a direct experience on hearing it, it means we need to work on acquiring the qualifications of a fit student. And there are 4 that we're going to get into. But in this verse, Shankara says, if even getting to the qualifications of a fit student is hard, let's step down this process and see what we have available to us in the tradition. So he lists, I think there were 3 of them, weren't there? First was by devotion.
No, constant performance of one's own duties.
Constant performance of one's own duty. So Shankara is taking this directly from the Bhagavad Gita. If you look at Gita, the first chapter, the yoga of Arjuna's dejection, that states the problem, the disintegrated personality. Chapter 2, I call it the table of contents chapter, Sankhya Yoga. Goes through all the major points he's going to cover in the whole text, then ends with the Sthipa Prajna Purusha section, the marks of the person of steady wisdom. Then he takes us all the way back to the beginning, what we need to do. So what's the topic covered in chapters 3, 4, and 5? Who remembers?
Karma yoga.
Karma yoga. And there are 5 elements that are covered in those 3 chapters. And we'll go through them briefly because this is what Shankara is indicating. So Arjuna ends up after he's, yammered away with self-pity at Krishna. What does he do? He sits on the chariot and says, I will not fight. Krishna says, don't be a wimp. Don't be a wuss. Don't be Kalaibya. Get up and fight. First principle, act, O Arjuna. Cannot escape the world through inaction. Yoga is not about staying in bed and pulling the covers over your head. That is not renunciation. That is not yoga. Act. How? According to our swadharma, your duty. Now, the exoteric understanding is according to your caste and station in life. There are certain prescribed activities to do. We can nuance that and take it deeper. When we're acting according to our vasanas. Wait a minute, I thought we were supposed to get rid of our vasanas. We're going to do that. But you don't get rid of them by suppressing them. Ride the horse in the direction it's going. If you want to be married and have a spouse and children, stuff like that, trying to restrain yourself only perverts the mind. You're going to act out. If you really want to be a doctor, say, oh, that's not spiritual. I should be a monk. You're going to work. But I tell you, once you start your swadharma, attachment, competition, failure, comparison, disappointment, control issues, all that stuff starts to come up. Sound familiar? So you take the person who's got an adharmic job. Adharmic job is where you don't have to work and they can't fire you. A lot of government workers get in that mind state. What are you working for? My pension. Someone says, well, what do you really want to do with your life? I want to be a baker, right? Go to baking school. Become a baker, and all of a sudden, all these issues arise. Success, failure, jealousy, envy, all those things. You don't get those feelings, which are all in there, till you start following your bliss. So Shankara here says you have to be established in your swadharma. What do I do with all that energy? Act according to your swadharma. Number 3, in the yajna spirit. And in Gita, he goes into depth. Excuse me. In how to make everything a sacrifice, make it sacred. He uses the Vedic yajna, the Vedic sacrifice with its metaphor. God is the priest doing it. God is the fire. God is the oblation. And you do everything into the mind. The result is God. It's all God. So you're working for a new employer. Who's doing the doing? God. Who's experiencing the results? God. So we try to divinize the activity and do our work for something other than our own ego needs. We do it as service. So, for example, you are a translator, right? And you could be out there saying, I want more money. I want to get this job. I want something more prestigious. I want this. I want that. I guarantee you, if you go down that road, you will suffer. But if on the other hand, now you're doing medical stuff, right?
Right.
If you walk into an interaction and you understand this is a suffering human being, and I'm there to serve that, I promise you, you'll walk out of there feeling so much better. Haven't you experienced that?
Yes.
Yajna spirit. Yajna spirit. Act according to your swadharma in the yajna spirit, in the spirit of selfless sacrifice. And then the fourth element, renouncing our attachment to the fruits of action. Thy right is to work alone, never to its fruits. All we get in life is the work. The outcome, Krishna's. He is the karma data, karma phala data, the giver of the fruits of action. Let go of the results. Do your best, let go of the rest. And the fifth element, renouncing our identification with the sense of agency. This is what's covered in chapter 5. Gita. Who or what is doing the doing? In Gita, they use the language guna and karma. The qualities of mind and the force of the past as it interacts with the karma, the force of the past of the society. We don't function in a vacuum. Or to use the frame that we get in Yoga Vasishta, I do nothing. I stand back. It is just the world doing its dance. Or you can take on the state, I do everything. It's all cosmic eye. What gets us into trouble is I, Jim, do this action and I don't do that one. That gets us into trouble. So this whole realm, karma yoga, is what's implied here when Shankara here says being established in our dharma. Why? Because if you're fighting your life, you're going to be too agitated and upset to effectively do yoga. And if you've gone through a period in your life where it's all struggle, where it's all fighting, you know, it's hard to make the time and take the time to do sadhana. Any thoughts on this before we move on to the next idea? All right, next idea.
And by austerities and by devotion to Lord Hari.
Yes, by tapas. What is austerity? Does he use the word tapas? I thought he did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tapas.
Tapas literally means heat. And the reason is because the mind is ruled by the law of inertia. The law of inertia states that an object at motion or at rest in a vacuum will continue at motion or at rest until energy is applied to change it. So the asteroid's moving through space until another asteroid hits it and changes it. The mind is ruled by the law of inertia. Whatever our habituated thought patterns are, the mind will return to that. It will return to that. And that's the law of our life. So if we have vulgarities that create havoc and tension in our lives, if we have kleshas, afflictions, if we have habitual fear, mind rushing into the future, FEAR, false evidence appearing real. Rarely is there anything in the now that's problematic. It's always the future. It's not real. If my mind returns to the past with hurt feelings and regret and resentment, my mind keeps going back to my family of origin or some abusive relationship or some argument with a friend or a spouse. These are habituated groups. Do we live a life where we continue to reinforce that? Do you have friends that you get together with and go over the same issues over and over and over again? Remember the saying in English, misery loves company. What does that do? I get reinforcement. I get agreement on my misery. So what's the way out? We have to begin to do tapas, austerity. This doesn't mean lying on a bed of nails. This doesn't mean necessarily fasting for days on end. This doesn't mean that you torture the body or the psyche. Effective tapas is doing our best to take a particular affliction, a particular movement of thought, try to move it from one line of thinking to another. Or if you have a habit. Now, listen very carefully. Some people think they're doing tapas when all they're doing is beating themselves up. There is no value in feeling crappy and shameful after the fact. Let's say you have an issue of anger. Does you no good after you've been angry and said something you regret and beating yourself up. Place to do the tapas is before you act on the anger. Oh, that's so much harder. So much harder. Pause, count to 10. Take a deep breath, walk away. And it does no good in the end to find out why I have the anger issue. This is my opinion. Back in the old-timey days in the 70s, there used to be this fellow, Werner Erhard, who did the EST training. You guys are too young. Do you remember the EST training? Yes. One of the things Werner used to say was, understanding is the booby prize. it rarely facilitates making a change. So, for example, your work with people who have food addictions. Does it help when they call you up after they've eaten the chocolate cake? What do you tell them to do?
Next time, call me before you.
Say it again.
Next time, call me before you put the chocolate cake in your mouth.
Yes, tapas. Doesn't mean you don't get support. Not talking about that. Why? Because what do you need to do? Change the behavior. Deal with the feelings in a different way. Is that what you basically do?
Yeah.
With God's help. Tapas. So, part of the precondition here is that we need to have developed some skill in learning how to deal with these kleshas, these afflictions, these doshas, these defects, these character defects. One of the metaphors that I like to use that's helpful to me. We are not a bad person trying to get good. We are not a sick person trying to get well. We're not an immoral person trying to get virtuous. This thing called a human being is an art form. Swamiji wrote a series called The Art of Man Making. We can say the art of being fully human. So if you are an artist and you're painting a seascape and you take your easel and your canvas and your paints out to the seashore and you set up on the sand and you're painting the sky and the waves and you look at the sky and you look at your painting and you say, top of that wave needs a little more white. That's very different than you look at the sea and you look at your painting and say, it's a failure, and you stab your painting. Or I'll never paint again. It's ugly. That's not art. That's not art. You're a musician. What do you do to learn a new piece of music?
This over and over.
And are you perfect at it the first time you read the score? No. So I invite us to look at our lives as an art form. And actually, it's much closer to a song than it is a painting. I can go to the National Gallery and I can see my Botticelli portrait of a youth. But when you sing a song, what happens to it when the song is over? Gone. So what happens to a human life when you're dead? Gone. For me, that takes the sting of judgment. You can observe, you can work to correct, improve. Now, I love something that Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, the great Tibetan Lama, said. He said, it's funny that we Buddhists who absolutely deny the existence of any permanent sense of self are seen to be working on ourselves more than anybody.
Mm-hmm.
It's a paradox. So with this, us. We begin to right the dysfunction of this wounded and broken psyche. Did you meditate this week? Oh, I just didn't feel like it, Jim. I'm following my intuition. Nonsense. You're following the indulgent tendency of the mind. Do tapas. You don't meditate when you feel like it. You meditate every day because it's abhyas, it's practice. Do tapas. You don't judge the results. You just do it. So, tapas, austerity. And the last one is devotion. Some of us, devotion to God, love of God, love of this work comes easily. Others of us are more intellectual. And that's not how we meet the world. We don't meet the world through our feelings. And in Vivekachudamani, Shankara says, the constant attempt to live up to our true nature is also termed devotion. You can be devoted to an ideal. You can be devoted to justice, working hard for human and civil rights. You can be devoted to women's issues. You can be devoted to medicine. Very hard. Doesn't mean you're going, surgery, you know. It's still devotion. It's still devotion. Did we get all the pieces of that verse? There were 3 things, weren't there?
Yes.
All right. Any questions? And how we do? We're fine. Going on. Now I think he's going to march into the adhikari, the 4 qualifications of the fit student.
Brahmadistha varanteshu vairagyam vishayan shvanu yatheva kakavisthayam vairagyam tadhi nirmalam. The pure and perfect dispassion is such a sense of aversion towards all the sense objects, from the position of Creator Brahma to an immobile object, as one would have towards the refuse of a crow.
So it's a rather vivid image. Modern day, most days I try to get out and take a walk. So I go down to the pathway around Lake Merritt and I walk around. And what I see on the sidewalk, on the pathway, is bird poop. Walk around it. Now, it's not that, I hate bird poop. I just don't want to step in it. So here Shankara is saying, understanding the world and developing mature vairagya is essential. Lots and lots of texts go deeply into this. On Monday nights, we've started the essence of Yoga Vasishta. Lord Rama leaves the palace, and he trips around and he comes back and he becomes despondent. That takes no joy. He's lost the zest for life. Why? Because he's begun to see the world as it is. Wealth moves through your fingers like sand. If you're very successful, people censure you. If you're powerful, everybody wants something from you. Have you ever known anybody who's exceedingly rich?
Oh, yes.
Many of them are highly mistrustful
Oh, yes.
because their experiences, everybody wants something. Was that your experience,
Yes.
your friend? If you're beautiful, guess what happens? It fades. If you have a hot spouse when you're young, when you're married 30 years,
Lukewarm.
hmm?
Lukewarm.
If you're lucky, sometimes it's cold tap water. And the body itself,
Mm.
skin, bone,
Hair.
flare, and filled with feces and urine. Just don't wash it for a week or wipe it for a week. Tell me how pleasing the body is. And everything in this world ends. And the more attached I am, the more suffering there is. I love the framework that Nisargadatta Maharaj says. He says worldly pleasure and suffering are the same thing.
Say that again.
Worldly pleasure and suffering are the same thing. It's like the heads and tails of a coin. You cannot have a coin with only one side. Every coin, it's what a coin is. It's got two sides. Now, it may have be mistaken have two heads, but it's got two sides. Most coins, there's a head on one side, tails on the other. We foolishly want a life that only has the green lights. That's not life. Better it is, and the more attached I am to it, the more I will suffer. Not if, but when it ends. I was talking with a gal, and she had a real hot love affair, and it broke up. And I said, well, how long were we together? It was a long time. It was 3 months. You have no idea what pain is. I wonder what Queen Elizabeth went through when Philip passed. They were married over 70 years. Deeply in love. That's pain. No escape. No escape. So Ram says, why should any of us bother to go after the world at all? I've given up on life, yet I have no attraction for death. I'm just gonna sit here. Now, in this day and age, the court physician would say, this boy needs Prozac. This boy needs Brahmavidya. This is mature vairagya, dispassion. The cause of mature dispassion is insight. So, some of you, I think, have taken Vipassana retreats. That's a Pali word. The Sanskrit would be Vipassana. I was taught that the root is drish and the verb form is pashyati. Mauricio says they say there's a old root called pash. Anyway, the whole point is it means to see. Pashyana means to see. Vipassana means deep, penetrating insight. Is that what they told you?
Inside meditation.
Hmm?
Inside meditation.
But insight, what does insight mean? What are you figuring out? What do you learn when you sit there for a whole retreat?
It's all temporary. And it's not.
You got it. And yet something there is that doesn't change. So, the knowing doesn't change. The known changes. So, the precondition to effective meditation is mature vairagya. Why? As long as the mind continues to extrovert into the world with this deeply rooted conviction, I can get juice out there. I can get juice out there. Maybe just a little bit more of this, or a little bit of that, or that person, or I want. The mind cannot be quiet enough and has no impulse towards its source. How do we end the mind's compulsive extroversion into the world and the senses? Not through willpower. Nobody's will is strong enough. But you can through insight. How? Through a steady observation of the inherent defects. Really having eyes wide open, seeing what the world can deliver, what it can't. I like to say 95 cents worth of work for a nickel's worth of pleasure. That's the world. It's just bad economics.
Mhm.
All right. So, the first of these conditions is vairagya, meaning I give up my attachment to everything, starting from the most minuscule up to and including Brahma, the creator. Meaning I want to be a powerful person. Or I want to be around powerful people. And it only takes one of two forms. I either want something in the world, people, places, things, and conditions, or I want to fix and improve me. I'm not okay today. I'll be so much better if I'm taller, skinnier. I get work done on my smarter, I have this credential, I have that credential. Doesn't mean not to do our duty in the world, going back to an earlier verse. But don't expect something from the world that it cannot. All right, any questions about Vairagya?
I have one. What if you are married to someone that does not have any inclination or any of this knowledge and lives in the world, for the world, and to the
It means nothing.
okay, can still live with someone who has
Does he stand over you every time you meditate and say, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that? Does he do that?
no.
When you are dispassionate and not getting engaged, does he says, get upset, get upset, get upset?
No, he's happy.
Yeah, I mean, what's the problem? We can only do our own yoga. We can't do someone else's.
My marriage is like that. My wife has no interest in spiritual things whatsoever, hates metaphor, hates analogy. And she's like a very physical person. It's okay.
Our problem is when we have an expectation, it will be better if hubby or wifey does this, joins me, meditates with me. We have a cosmic union. All romanticism. Kaivalya, we do this work alone. Always. Even when you are at a group meditation. Now, the Lord, because of punya, merit done in prior lives, it may be given you a spouse that joins you on the path. But you can't make it happen. What's the phrase I learned? You can't teach a pig to sing. It doesn't work and it annoys the pig.
And sometimes difference makes for a good balance.
All right. So was this 3 or 4 that we just did?
We finished 4.
We finished 4. We'll start with. Huh? What did you say?
Oh no, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And we'll start with 5 next week. We'll end here.
Sorry.
Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Hari Om. Are you enjoying this text?
Yes.
Yes.
It's a good.
It goes right to it.
Yeah.
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 I like it.
All right. Hari Om. And Scott, I am this moment going into my bedroom to email you the text.